Welcome to Ecology of Parenting. So as you can see here, there are all different kinds of families that we learned last week. This week, we're going to be focusing on parents. So what are parenting styles? Well, maybe you've heard of Diana Baumrind. She came up with the different parenting styles. And these are psychological concepts, right? These are ways that influence behavior and strategies parents use to raise their children. So, important concepts to understand in relation to parenting is both warmth and control, responsiveness and demandingness. So, how much and where parents fall on these different areas put them into different parenting categories. So, when I'm talking about being responsive and being warm, that's being loving, encouraging, supportive versus being more negative or stern or punitive, right? And the other part of that is how much control do you exhibit over your child? Do you have realistic rules and expectations? Or do you maybe not enforce limits or boundaries? Or are you extreme in any of those areas, right? So that can put you into different categories in terms of warmth and control. So this little chart here puts it into perspective. If we start with the authoritative parent, notice they're at the top left corner. They're both demanding, yet responsive and sensitive. That is the kind of parent that mostly we aim to be, right? We have rules, we have boundaries, we have expectations, but we do it in a loving way. So authoritative. Now notice the one to the right of that is authoritarian. It's very close in spelling. When I think of authoritarian, I think of dictarian. And I know dictarian's not a word, but like a dictator. They're demanding and have rules and boundaries, and they do it in a stern and punitive way. They're not very loving. They're more cold and standoffish. On the other spectrum of that, across from that is a permissive parent. They don't really enforce limits or rules, but they are sensitive and responsive. They're loving to their child, but they don't have a lot of boundaries. And then see the uninvolved parent. They're both stern and punitive and don't enforce limits and are many times not involved in the child's life. So let's break these down a little bit further, right? Those authoritarian parents who are highly controlling and low in warmth, they really place high value on being obedient. They don't tend to have a lot of discussion. It's very harsh. It's my way. I don't want to hear about it. I make the rules. And in these cases, children tend to be well behaved, but they also tend to have low self-esteem, low independence, and low assertion. So it's affecting their overall well-being of having very harsh parents. Permissive parents are the low control and high warmth, so the opposite of the authoritarian parents. They have minimal control, they give a lot of freedom, a lot of independence, so the children are highly independent. They're self-assertive and many times friendly, but many times are low compliance and impulse control because they're not used to someone telling them what to do or to follow rules. So when their parents have very few expectations, the child typically comes into situations expecting that there won't be a lot of expectations. So that can lead to some conflict, especially in school and other avenues. And then we have that authoritative parent, right? Right in the middle where they have high control but high warmth. They enforce their standards but encourage their child to communicate and ask questions. They're warm and demanding. They're direct with their respect. Their standards are clear, and it's the most effective type. These children tend to be independent, self-assertive, achievement-oriented, cooperate well with both peers and parents, and be friendly. Again, that's a general overview. When we come into thinking about any child, we also have temperament to think about, right? We've talked about that previously. So it's not always the perfect scenario for every child, but overall, of experiencing this parenting over time throughout childhood, that's what they find is most common in terms of the effects. And the uninvolved parent. Low control, low warmth. They're many times insensitive to the child's feelings and needs, even by just not being around and not being involved in the child's daily life. Again, they typically have few demands and rules because they're not there on a daily basis. They can be an absentee parent, an addict, in and out of prison, in and out of the child's life. Again, there's many scenarios in why the parent may be uninvolved. Okay, so when we evaluate parenting practices, we have to look at some different areas, right? Is it developmentally appropriate? Just like when we look at teachers, are they teaching in a developmentally appropriate way? Where they involve using knowledge of the child's growth patterns, right? You know this child, you're their parent, but also looking at their individual differences. What's their temperament? How does this child navigate through life? You have to take all that into account when then having expectations and rules and such. How much does the parent guide them? Do you give them direction? Do you demonstrate and model? Are you there to supervise and influence? And then discipline. How much are you focusing on punishment or trying to extinct certain behaviors or correcting? So the parent, again, has a lot of responsibility. And that's why, we evaluate in terms of a lot of different factors. Okay, appropriate parenting practices. So one thing that's appropriate is to encourage autonomy with a young child. Again, when it's age appropriate for them to be a little bit more independent, let them make some of their own choices. Maybe about you provide two different outfit choices. Uh, talk about chores and allow them to choose the first chore. So you show respect for the child's struggle. You don't just tell them, children don't cry. You see that they may be struggling with the independence and you assist them with that. When we are encouraging autonomy, we don't want to ask too many questions or rush to answer too many questions. We want to allow the child to navigate the experience. We can encourage children to use sources outside of the home and inside of the home. Sorry, I don't know why that's written twice. And not taking away their hope, right? Children at a young age see exponential possibilities. And we as parents want to allow that exploration to encourage them to move forward in life. So encouraging autonomy is a very important part of parenting. So think about ways that we could encourage autonomy versus keeping children dependent. So for example, the child says to the parent, I was late for school today. You have to wake me up earlier tomorrow. Well, we can keep the child dependent on us as parents, right? We can say something like, I'm sorry, sweetie, that was my fault. I'll definitely wake you up earlier tomorrow. Or you can start to show the child a little bit of reality and helping them be more self assertive and say, I could help you set up your alarm clock and an alarm would wake you up. So, how much time do you think you need to get ready, right? I'll help you with the alarm, but the alarm is now going to help you get up earlier rather than having it be the parent's burden and the parent's responsibility. So problem solving approaches for parents, right? We don't always want to give the child the correct answer or any kind of answer, right? We want them to kind of problem solve. But at the same time, we have to consider different factors. So the first step is to talk to them about their feelings and needs. What are they trying to accomplish? Why are they frustrated? What's going on? Talk about your feelings and needs, right? I hear you're getting frustrated, but when you hit your brother, talking about how maybe certain things aren't appropriate. Step 3 then is to brainstorm with the child to find a solution. So how are we going to solve this problem? You want the toy, your brother has the toy, you started fighting over the toy, right? So maybe step 4, you could write down ideas without evaluating. So one idea is that you get the toy back. Another idea is this, right? And you let the children even be part of that process. Step 5 then would just be deciding which suggestions you like, which ones you don't like, which ones you plan to follow through on, and again, allowing the child to be part of that process. Now, respect is really important during this whole approach, right? When we show respect for ourselves, for the child, it shows them what can happen when people, come together and try to solve things, and gives them hope, and again allows them to continue to try to problem solve in the future. Okay. So what about inappropriate parenting practices, right? We talked earlier about Baumrinn's uninvolved parenting style. Well, how does that then affect the child? So, and again, here we said it could be an absentee parent, it could be an addict, it can be a parent who was in and out of prison. It could also maybe be a parent who was abusive. So now we're going to go into the signs of abuse, and getting a little bit deeper into that. So I do want to say, some of the images and details on the following slides can be difficult to process. So if you do need to take a break, you're more than welcome to, and come back to the video. But I do think it's important to know about children we work with, know about what children experience, and even know where to get help, right? Okay. So the term abuse is also a synonym of maltreatment, where a child is experiencing some kind of negative treatment. It could be physical, sexual, psychological, or emotional. There's also neglect, which falls under its own category, where it can involve abandonment, lack of supervising, maybe not having proper food or medical care or shelter, uncleanliness. Those would be typical factors that we would see under neglect. Now, maltreatment in terms of physical abuse is involving deliberate harm to the child's body. So some kind of bruise, other, again, physical harm to a young child. Next, we have sexual abuse, which again is when a person is forcing, tricking, or threatening a child into any kind of sexual contact, whether it is prostitution, again, any kind of sexual contact is considered sexual abuse. And then we have psychological or emotional abuse. They can be used interchangeably. This style of abuse is very different from the other two because the other two many times leave physical evidence. Psychological abuse is going on in the brain, right? It's something that's affecting mental health and behavior. So what they find in that type of abuse is it's typically a destructive pattern. It's continual attacks by an adult on a child's development of themselves, their self-confidence, their social competence, and many times involves rejecting, isolating, terrorizing, ignoring, corrupting. So if any of you take my child psychology class, we talk about a case of a young girl named Jeannie who was found at 13 years old, and she had been extremely isolated. That's considered a form of psychological abuse. And again, if you get further into her story, you would see why. So psychological abuse is very difficult because again, it's many times the child's word versus the parent's word of what occurred. Because again, typically there's not a lot of physical evidence. Now, what are the consequences of abuse? Well, many abusers have a family history of maltreatment. So many times it's continuing this cycle of abuse. They were abused by their parents, they abuse themselves as parents, and many times the children end up becoming abusers, whether it's through bullying or abusing their own children. Now, they do find that certain physical and psychological characteristics might make a child more prone to maltreatment. And what's so sad about that is it's typically things that are completely out of the child's control, like having slow to warm up temperament or difficult temperament, being a premature baby, having developmental delays, like all the, again, those things that are out of a child's control. And then on top of that, they are abused. Families who are abusive many times tend to isolate from their communities. So, again, a kind of risk factor or a flag would be a child who's coming through the classroom. You realize this is the third sibling in this family that you've, had in your classroom, and you've never met the parents, although they are, the guardians of the children. Again, why are they isolating? You want to get deeper information on the families in your care, because again, it gives you a lot of background into what the child is going through. All right. Well, that is our presentation on parenting. So please make sure to go back to Blackboard and email me with any questions. Thank you.